What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the first weekend of the Vanguard beta for PlayStation is almost live, and therefore what I wanted to do is go through a bunch of these settings to help you guys get set up and make sure you've got the game looking as good as it can possibly look, as well as just a few other little tips with the settings that I've noticed based on my playtime last week in the early capture session. And even if you're watching this video before the beta officially goes live, but you have it downloaded on your PlayStation, you can access the settings by plugging in a keyboard to your console and hitting the F3 button when you're in the screen that says connection failed because the servers aren't live yet. So assuming you've got it downloaded, you can actually hop on and adjust your settings right now. And what I'm going to do in this video, I'm not going to touch on too many of the really personalized settings like your sensitivity and all that kind of stuff. That's all going to be down to preferences. Although I did want to point out, for a lot of people have been asking, you can flip your triggers here. Even though it's not in the standard button layout here, like you don't have tactical flipped here, you can just turn flipped on here, which will then turn it into tactical flipped for anybody that likes to play like that. But like I said, all of this stuff here is really just down to preference until we get into dead zones. I just wanted to give you a reminder, the stick dead zones by default, I believe, are set to 10. I would recommend dropping those down. Every controller is going to be a little bit different on your dead zone, but that 10 dead zone is a little on the high side, and therefore your aim and movement isn't going to feel quite as responsive as it could if you leave that at the default value. So for me and my controller, 4 tends to be about where it should be, where I don't get a massive amount of stick drift, so my aim doesn't move by itself if I'm not touching the controller. If I go any lower than this, then my aim does start to move by itself. So for me, 4 is in a good place. For most people, I would recommend dropping that down below 10. Now, next up, let's get into the graphics. This is the stuff I want to focus on the most, and keep in mind, this is for the console settings. I'm not going to get deep into PC settings because we don't have access to the PC beta yet. But the first thing I wanted to point out is just like in Modern Warfare, with your brightness, I highly recommend keeping your brightness right around 50, even if it doesn't look the way it's supposed to look, like where you can barely see that middle logo there. Even though that's the case, I would recommend keeping it at 50, and instead of adjusting this value, adjust your TV or your monitor settings in order to get that into a good spot. And the reason I say this is, for whatever reason with this game, as well as Modern Warfare 2019, if you boost up your brightness in these settings, it has a tendency to wash out the game. It makes the game look terrible. You lose a lot of that contrast and everything in the game itself, so you're much better off making those adjustments on your TV or monitor to get this where it needs to be. Additionally, we have the camera movement setting, which is a new setting. I would recommend turning this as low as possible. I'm hoping this doesn't automatically reset like it was doing in the alpha. Like, we could adjust this a little bit in the alpha build of the game, but every time you adjusted it, once you got into the game, it would just reset itself. In either case, I would try setting it to the lowest value and just hope it doesn't reset in this particular build. Then obviously, motion blur, you should always be turning this off for a multiplayer experience. It's designed to make things look a little more cinematic and maybe make up for some for loss of performance. So if you have some frame drops or something, it could potentially fill in the gaps. But in my experience, it just makes the game look terrible, and it also makes it so you could be missing out on valuable information. As you sweep your screen across, if everything's blurry in the background, you might miss an enemy that you would otherwise see. So you definitely want to turn these off. And then another thing is depth of field. This is a setting that we didn't have access to in the alpha, and I'm so happy to see this in the beta build of the game. This is another setting you want off. 100% you want this off. The way this works is if it's on and you're aiming down sight, like you can see in the image on the side there, you can see how blurry everything up close is while aiming down sight. And you don't want things to be blurry in a multiplayer environment where you're competing against other people, and catching little visual cues is very important. Because on the flip side of this, if you aren't aiming down sight in this situation that you see on the right, everything up close would be nice and focused, but then everything at a distance would be super blurry. And if there's an enemy there, you might not be able to see them. So I highly, highly recommend the first thing that you do when you get into this game is turn off this depth of field setting. It's just as important to turn off as motion blur. And I don't know why they have this on by default. I think it looks terrible with this on. So make sure you turn that one off. But finally in this video, there is one other thing that I wanted to mention that I noticed in the beta build of the game, and this has to do with audio. The first thing is, for me personally, I always like turning the music volume down. That's just a personal preference thing. However, dialogue volume. Assuming this build is going to be very similar or the same build that we played last week for our capture session, Captain Butcher won't shut up as you're playing the game. He is constantly talking in the background. Basically, every time you get a kill, it seems like Captain Butcher has something to say about it. And therefore, I would recommend turning your dialogue volume down at least to some degree. I put it at 70 here. I might play around with this a little bit over the weekend, but I think a lot of you guys, if you leave this at 100, you're going to end up getting very annoyed with Captain Butcher by the end of the beta. So I'd recommend dropping that down a little bit just so it's not too overwhelming with him constantly saying something in your ear. Oh, I almost forgot. There's actually a brand new setting as well that I did talk about in my impressions video that I'm so happy to see is finally here on console, and this I'd also highly recommend turning on, and that is in the interface section. Scroll down to Telemetry, and with this, you can turn on your latency. You just see it pop up on the top left of the screen there. This will show your latency in real time on the screen while playing the game without having to press start or press tab or anything to pull up your menu. It's just there on the screen, and that's excellent. I'd also recommend turning packet loss on, so then you can see if you are getting packet loss in a game. You could do other things like system clock and stuff, but the main two that you want to have on are going to be server latency and packet loss. That way, if you are feeling like something's going on in the game, like maybe you're lagging or things are feeling kind of skippy, you can just take a quick glance to the top left of your screen and you'll see what your latency is, you'll see what your packet loss is doing, and this is just extremely helpful, and I'm so happy that they have this in the console version of the game now. It's worth noting you can also adjust the size here, so if you don't like it being that default larger size, you can drop that size down and still get that information. Also, we do have the ability to have a round or square minimap. Keep in mind, if you choose square, you will get about 27% extra coverage on your minimap by going square compared to round, so I highly recommend turning square on as well. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's quick video on the settings for the beta build of the game that I'd recommend taking a look at. If you adjust these settings, you're going to get a much better experience than just playing on default, at least in my opinion. And so far, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised at the amount of settings that we have available for this game. I think this is the most we've ever seen for a console Call of Duty game. On that note, this also reminded me that in my impressions video from a couple days ago, I mentioned that there was no FOV slider for console. That still isn't going to be in the beta build of the game, but I did want to keep you updated in case you missed that pinned comment on that video. Sledgehammer has since confirmed that the FOV slider will be coming to console at launch, so we won't have it in the beta, unfortunately, but it will be there at launch, which is amazing news. And with that, I'd like to hear in the comment section below, what do you guys think about these settings that we have available this time around, especially knowing that we will have an FOV slider coming at launch? Are you generally happy with these settings? Are there any settings that you're missing that you wish were there? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.